In the eerie stillness of dawn, a tiny puppy's desperate cries pierce the air, charging toward Officer Ethan Caldwell on a deserted street. Its tear-filled eyes lock onto his, radiating a plea that grips his soul. But as he lifts the trembling pup, its ordinary collar reveals a chilling twist. The word "help" etched in elegant script, stark and sinister. Who did this? Frantically, its tiny cries cutting through the stillness of the morning. Ethan quickly stepped out of his car, instinctively crouching to the ground. "Hey there, little one," he said softly, his voice gentle to avoid scaring the trembling creature. The puppy, a scruffy little thing with floppy ears and a golden coat, stopped a few feet away, panting heavily as if it had run a long way. Its wide, tear-filled eyes met Ethan's, filled with a desperation that made his heart clench. "Where did you come from, buddy?" Ethan murmured, extending a hand slowly. The puppy hesitated but eventually scampered forward, pressing its tiny body against his leg as if seeking comfort and protection. Ethan gently scooped it up, noticing how cold and fragile it felt in his arms. That's when he saw it, the collar. At first glance, it looked ordinary, a leather band with a shiny tag dangling from it. But as Ethan turned it over to read the inscription, his breath caught in his throat. The tag wasn't engraved with an address or phone number. Instead, it bore a single cryptic word in elegant script: "Help." Ethan's stomach churned. What did this mean? Who would put such a message on a collar? And more importantly, where had this puppy come from? The officer glanced around, his instincts on high alert. The street was deserted, and there were no signs of anyone nearby who might have been looking for the pup. As the puppy let out another soft whimper, Ethan felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just a stray dog, this was a cry for help, and he was going to find out why. Ethan carried the trembling puppy into the police station, its tiny body pressed firmly against his chest. The morning sun illuminated the building's faded brick facade, and the familiar scent of coffee and paperwork greeted him as he stepped inside. Officer Lila Bennett, Ethan's partner, was at her desk, sipping from a steaming mug. She looked up with a puzzled expression when she saw the puppy in his arms. "Starting a rescue shelter now, Caldwell?" she teased, though her tone softened when she saw the concern on his face. "This little guy ran out to me crying," Ethan said, setting the puppy on the desk. The pup whimpered and curled into a tight ball, still visibly shaken. "But it's not just that. Look at this." He handed the collar to Lila, who raised an eyebrow as she read the inscription. "Help." Lila's playful demeanor faded instantly. "That's unusual," she said, her brow furrowing. "Are you sure he's not just lost?" Ethan shook his head. No ID, no microchip, and no sign of anyone looking for him. And the way he ran up to me, it's like he knew I could help. Lila reached out to pet the puppy, who flinched slightly but then leaned into her touch. "Poor thing," she murmured. "He's terrified." Ethan sat down at his desk, setting the collar beside him as he booted up his computer. "I'm going to check local reports. Missing dogs, break-ins, anything unusual. Someone might have left a message on the collar for a reason." While Ethan sifted through the database, Lila prepared a small bowl of water and some scraps of chicken from her lunch, coaxing the puppy to eat. "You think this is connected to something bigger?" she asked. "I don't know," Ethan replied, his eyes scanning the screen. "But it feels off." As the minutes passed, Ethan's search came up empty. There were no reports of missing dogs matching the puppy's description, and no incidents in the area that seemed related. Frustrated but undeterred, he decided to expand his search radius. Just as he was about to give up, Lila spoke. "Hey, look at this," she said, holding up the collar. She had flipped it inside out, revealing a tiny, almost imperceptible stitching on the inner side. It wasn't just a decorative pattern. It was a series of letters and numbers, carefully embroidered into the leather. "What is that?" Ethan asked, leaning closer. "It looks like coordinates," Lila said, grabbing her phone to confirm. She typed the numbers into a mapping app, her eyes widening as the location popped up. "It's about 15 miles from here, an old cabin near Pinewood Forest." Ethan frowned. "That's a remote area. Not many people go out there, especially this time of year." Lila nodded. "Do you think whoever left this message wanted someone to find the cabin?" Ethan glanced at the puppy, who had finally relaxed enough to eat a few bites of chicken. "It's possible. Either way, I don't think we can ignore this." An hour later, Ethan and Lila were driving down a winding dirt road leading toward Pinewood Forest. The puppy, now nicknamed Rusty by Lila, sat on her lap, occasionally letting out a soft whine, as if sensing the importance of their journey. The road grew narrower as they approached the coordinates, the towering pine trees casting long shadows over the path. Finally, they arrived at the location, a weathered cabin with a sagging roof and boarded-up windows. It looked abandoned, but there were faint signs of recent activity: tire tracks in the dirt, a broken branch near the entrance, and a faint glow coming from one of the windows. Ethan parked the car and turned to Lila. "Stay with Rusty. I'll check it out." Lila started to protest but stopped when she saw the determined look in his eyes. "Be careful," she said. Ethan approached the cabin cautiously, his hand resting on the holster of his service weapon. He knocked on the door, but there was no response. The faint glow inside flickered, suggesting a candle or flashlight. Pushing the door open, Ethan stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. The interior was sparse: an old table, a few chairs, and a pile of blankets in the corner. But what caught his attention was a small wooden box on the table. It was intricately carved, with a lock that had been recently broken. Inside the box were several photographs, each one showing a different dog. Some looked like strays, while others wore collars similar to Rusty's. Beneath the photos was a handwritten note that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. "They're watching. Protect them." Ethan's mind raced. Who was they? And what did these dogs have in common? He grabbed the box and returned to the car, where Lila was waiting anxiously. "What did you find?" she asked. Ethan placed the box on the dashboard, showing her the photos and the note. "Someone's been keeping records. These dogs, they're part of something bigger." Rusty let out a sudden bark, startling them both. The puppy's wide eyes were fixed on the woods, his small body trembling once again. Lila followed his gaze. "Do you think there's more out there?" Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "Only one way to find out." Ethan drove cautiously along the edge of Pinewood Forest, following the narrow dirt path that seemed to disappear into the trees. The discovery of the box and the cryptic note had left him with more questions than answers. Lila sat beside him, holding Rusty tightly as the puppy continued to whimper, his eyes darting toward the shadows outside the window. "This isn't just about stray dogs," Lila said, breaking the tense silence. "Someone went through a lot of trouble to leave that collar and those coordinates. But why us? Why now?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. His focus was on the road ahead, but his mind was racing. The photographs, the note, the strange glow in the cabin. Everything felt connected, yet he couldn't piece it together. "Maybe Rusty was supposed to find someone, anyone," Ethan said finally, "and we just happened to be in the right place at the right time." Lila glanced at the puppy, her expression softening. "Or the wrong place at the wrong time." They reached a clearing deeper in the forest, where the path widened slightly. Ethan parked the car and cut the engine. The sudden silence was almost deafening, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the occasional distant call of a bird. The air felt heavy, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Ethan opened the glove compartment and pulled out a flashlight. "Stay here with Rusty," he told Lila. "I'll take a look around." Lila hesitated, but she could see the determination in his eyes. "Be careful," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stepped out of the car, the flashlight's beam cutting through the darkness as he scanned the area. The ground was uneven, littered with fallen branches and patches of moss. His boots crunched softly against the dirt as he moved forward, his every sense on high alert. He didn't have to go far. Just beyond the clearing, he found something that made his blood run cold. A small cluster of shallow pits, each one filled with discarded collars. Some were old and rusted, while others were newer, the leather still supple. Ethan crouched down, picking up one of the collars. It was engraved with a single word: "Hope." "What the hell is going on here?" Ethan muttered to himself. Back at the car, Rusty started barking, his tiny body trembling with renewed fear. Lila tried to calm him, but his cries grew louder, more urgent. It wasn't until Ethan returned, his face pale and his hands gripping the collar tightly, that the puppy finally quieted down. "Collars," Ethan said, his voice low. "Dozens of them. All buried in pits just beyond the clearing." Lila's eyes widened. Do you think someone's hurting these dogs?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "But whatever's happening, it's deliberate. These collars, someone's been collecting them. And they all have words engraved, just like Rusty's." Lila looked down at the puppy, who had pressed himself against her chest, his tiny tail tucked between his legs. What could this mean? Is it some kind of message? Ethan sat heavily in the driver's seat, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, but it's not safe here. We need to get back to the station and figure this out." The drive back to town was tense, the weight of their discovery hanging heavily in the air. Rusty had finally fallen asleep, his small body curled up on Lila's lap. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, but his mind was elsewhere. Who had left those collars, and why had they sent Rusty to him? As they approached the edge of town, Ethan's radio crackled to life. "Caldwell, this is dispatch. We've got a call you need to hear." Ethan picked up the receiver. "Go ahead." "There's been a report of suspicious activity near Pinewood Forest," the dispatcher said. "A local hiker spotted someone loading what looked like animal cages into a van. They took off before we could get a plate number, but they were heading in your direction." Ethan's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Got it. We're on our way." Lila looked at him, her expression a mix of fear, and approached the van cautiously, his flashlight illuminating the ground ahead. The area was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. As he got closer, he noticed the rear doors were hanging open, revealing several empty cages inside. Her faint metallic smell lingered in the air, making his stomach churn. "Police!" Ethan called out, his voice firm. "Is anyone here?" There was no response, but as he rounded the side of the van, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat, a trail of paw prints leading into the woods. They were small, too small to belong to anything but puppies. Ethan's jaw tightened. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over yet. Ethan followed the trail of paw prints into the woods, his flashlight cutting through the growing darkness. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, and every crunch of leaves under his boots seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. Behind him, the white van sat abandoned on the roadside, its open doors swaying slightly in the breeze. He crouched down to examine the prints more closely. They were fresh, heading deeper into the forest in a zigzagging pattern, as though the animals had been frightened and running aimlessly. But where had they gone? And why had someone left the van in such a hurry? Ethan's radio crackled softly, pulling him from his thoughts. "Caldwell, you okay out there?" Lila's voice was laced with concern. "I'm fine," Ethan replied, keeping his voice low. "The van's empty, but there's a trail of paw prints leading into the woods. I'm going to follow it." There was a pause on the other end. "Be careful. Whoever's behind this might still be out there." As Ethan moved deeper into the woods, the trail became more erratic. The paw prints were joined by larger boot prints, suggesting someone had been chasing the animals. The trees closed in around him, their gnarled branches forming a canopy that blocked out the fading daylight. The atmosphere was suffocating, every shadow and sound a potential threat. Then he heard it, a faint whimper. Ethan froze, his heart pounding. He scanned the area with his flashlight, the beam finally landing on a small shivering shape huddled beneath a fallen log. It was another puppy, its fur matted and its eyes wide with fear. It looked up at Ethan, letting out a pitiful cry as it tried to crawl closer. "Hey there, little one," Ethan murmured, crouching down and reaching out a hand. The puppy hesitated, but eventually dragged itself forward, revealing an injured hind leg. Ethan's chest tightened at the sight. As he carefully picked up the puppy, he noticed something familiar around its neck, a collar identical to Rusty's, with the same elegant engraving. This one bore the word "safe." What is going on here? The injured puppy in his arms let out a soft whimper, and Ethan quickly shushed it, pressing his back against the tree to remain hidden. The voices continued to approach, their tone growing more frustrated. "We shouldn't have left the collars," the first voice muttered. "It's going to lead them right to us." Ethan's mind raced. The collars, they weren't just random. They were part of some sort of system, a trail of breadcrumbs left behind either intentionally or as a desperate act of defiance. And now whoever was behind this was trying to cover their tracks. The voices moved past him, heading in the direction of the van. Ethan took the opportunity to slip away, his steps careful and deliberate as he retreated deeper into the woods. He had to get the injured puppy back to the car, and fast. When he finally emerged from the forest, Lila was waiting anxiously by the cruiser, Rusty barking in her arms. Her eyes widened when she saw the second puppy cradled against Ethan's chest. "What happened?" she asked, rushing forward. "Found him under a log," Ethan said, his breath coming in short bursts. "And I heard voices. 2 people. Probably the ones who abandoned the van. They're trying to move the rest of the dogs." Lila's expression hardened. "We have to call for backup." Ethan nodded. "Do it. But first, we need to get this little guy to safety." As Lila radioed for assistance, Ethan carefully examined the second puppy. Its leg was swollen and bruised, but it didn't appear to be broken. The collar around its neck intrigued him. The word "safe" seemed to contradict the dire circumstances in which the puppy had been found. "What do you think it means?" Lila asked, glancing at the collar. Ethan shook his head. "I don't know, but it's starting to feel like someone's trying to send a message." Backup arrived within minutes. 2 additional patrol cars and an animal control unit. Ethan briefed the team on what he had discovered, sharing the location of the van and the voices he had heard in the woods. The officers quickly formed a plan to sweep the area, hoping to apprehend the suspects and rescue any remaining animals. Meanwhile, the animal control team took both puppies into their care, promising to treat their injuries and keep them safe. Rusty whined as they carried the injured pup away, his little tail. Lila crouched down to comfort Rusty, who had been whining softly ever since the injured puppy was taken away. The sight tugged at Ethan's heart, but he knew there was no time to dwell on emotions. Answers were needed. "What now?" Lila asked, her voice quiet but resolute. Ethan exhaled deeply. "We wait for the team to report back, but something tells me this goes deeper than just a few people in the woods. Those collars, hope and safe, they mean something. Someone wanted us to find these dogs, and I don't think it's the same people who are trying to move them." Lila frowned, running her fingers through Rusty's soft fur. "Do you think it could be a whistleblower? Someone on the inside trying to expose what's happening?" "It's possible," Ethan admitted. "But if that's the case, then they're playing a dangerous game. Whoever's behind this isn't messing around." The radio on Ethan's belt crackled to life, snapping him out of his thoughts. "Officer Caldwell, this is Delta Unit. We've apprehended 2 suspects near the abandoned van. No sign of additional dogs yet, but we're continuing the search." Ethan grabbed the receiver. "Understood. Secure the suspects and keep me updated." He turned to Lila, his jaw tight. "They've got 2 of them. Hopefully we'll get some answers." "Do you think they'll talk?" she asked, rising to her feet. Ethan shook his head. "People involved in things like this don't usually cooperate, but maybe they slipped up, left something behind at the van or the cabin." As they waited for more updates, Ethan decided to take another look at the note they had found in Rusty's box. He unfolded the paper, studying the elegant handwriting once more. "They must be safe. Trust the dogs. They'll lead you to the truth." The words seemed almost poetic, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was a deeper meaning. Trust the dogs. What truth were they supposed to uncover? "Do you still have the first collar?" Lila asked, glancing at him. Ethan nodded, pulling the collar engraved with hope out of his pocket. He laid it beside Rusty's collar and the note, trying to see if there was any hidden connection between them. Lila tilted her head, her brow furrowing. "What if the words on the collars are clues? Like a breadcrumb trail? Breadcrumbs leading to what, though?" Ethan asked, his frustration evident. Lila hesitated before speaking. "Maybe not what, but who? Whoever left these messages must have known that dogs would find someone who cared enough to follow the trail." Rusty let out a small bark, startling both Ethan and Lila. The puppy stood up on his tiny legs, His nose pointed toward the forest. He barked again, more insistent this time, as if he were trying to say something. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You think he knows something?" Lila shrugged, picking up the pup. "Dogs have instincts we can't always explain. Maybe he remembers something, or someone." Ethan grabbed his flashlight and gestured toward the woods. "Let's see where he leads us." Rusty squirmed in Lila's arms, barking excitedly as Ethan led the way into the forest. They followed a faint path that veered away from where the officers had gone, Rusty's behavior growing more animated with each step. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to change, thicker, quieter, almost as if the forest itself was holding its breath. After about 15 minutes of walking, they reached a small clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated shed, its wooden planks weathered and overgrown with ivy. The sight sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. "This doesn't feel right," Lila whispered, clutching Rusty tightly. Ethan nodded, his hand resting on the holster of his weapon. "Stay behind me." The shed's door creaked loudly as Ethan pushed it open, the sound echoing ominously in the still air. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a single dusty window, but it was enough to reveal the unsettling scene before them. The war cry of courage, strength, freedom. "These aren't just dogs," Layla said, her voice trembling. "They're symbols. Someone's using them to send a message." Ethan's mind raced as he tried to make sense of it all. The collars, the notes, the photos. It was like a puzzle with too many missing pieces. But one thing was clear. Whoever had orchestrated this was deeply committed to their cause, whatever it might be. The sound of a branch snapping outside the shed made both of them freeze. Ethan turned off his flashlight, signaling for Lila to stay quiet. He drew his weapon, his heart pounding as footsteps approached the door. "Who's there?" Ethan called out, his voice firm. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a figure silhouetted against the moonlight. It was an older woman, her face lined with age but her eyes sharp and piercing. She stepped inside, her gaze landing on Rusty. "You found them," she said softly, her voice filled with both relief and urgency. "You're the ones I've been waiting for." Ethan lowered his weapon slightly, his eyes narrowing as he studied the older woman. She appeared unarmed and unthreatening, but there was an undeniable intensity in her gaze. Rusty, meanwhile, wagged his tail furiously as though recognizing her. The woman knelt down, extending a hand toward the puppy who immediately ran to her, nuzzling into her palm. "You've been through a lot, haven't you, little one?" she murmured, stroking Rusty's head gently. Then she looked up at Ethan and Lila. "Thank you for finding him and for following the signs." Ethan exchanged a glance with Lila, who was still holding the other collar. "For you're going to have to explain what's going on," he said firmly. "Who are you and what do these collars mean?" The woman straightened up, brushing dirt off her hands. "My name is Maris Vaughn. Well, I guess you could call me a guardian of sorts." She gestured to the photos and documents lining the shed walls. "This isn't just a collection of random information. It's a record of the dogs we've saved and the people we've tried to stop." Lila frowned, stepping closer to the board. "Stop from doing what?" Maris hesitated, her gaze dropping to Rusty, who was now sitting quietly by her side. "From exploiting these animals. There's a group, well-funded, organized, and ruthless, that's been using dogs for illegal experiments and trafficking. They see them as tools, not living creatures. My team has been working to rescue as many as we can, but we're running out of time." Ethan's grip tightened on his flashlight as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The collars, the cryptic notes, the abandoned van, it all pointed to something far bigger than he had anticipated, but one question still nagged at him. "Why the collars?" he asked. "Why not just take the dogs to a shelter or report this to the authorities?" Maris's lips pressed into a thin line. "We've tried that, but this group has connections everywhere, even in law enforcement. If we're not careful, the dogs we rescue end up right back in their hands. The collars are a way to communicate, to signal to those who are trustworthy, people like you." Lila looked stunned and teary. "And we've lost more than we've saved, but I'm not giving up, not until we've shut them down for good." The room fell silent for a moment. the weight of Maris's words settling over them like a heavy fog. Ethan glanced at the puppy sitting at her feet, then at the injured pup they had rescued earlier. Both were innocent victims in a much larger battle, one that seemed far from over. "What do you need from us?" he asked finally, his tone steady but resolute. Maris met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and urgency. "I need you to trust me and to help me. There's a transport coming tonight, not far from here. If we can intercept it, we might be able to rescue the rest of the dogs and gather the evidence we need to bring this operation down." Ethan felt a pang of doubt. This wasn't what he had signed up for, but the determination in Maris's voice and the trust in Rusty's eyes left him with little choice. As the sun began to set, Maris laid out the plan. The transport would be passing through a secluded road about 5 miles from their location. She had intel suggesting that it would be heavily guarded, but she believed they could intercept it with the element of surprise. Lila looked uneasy. "This sounds dangerous. What if they're armed?" "They probably will be," Maris admitted, "but we're not going in blind. I've got backup waiting at the rendezvous point, people who've been working with me for years. All I need is your help to get there." Ethan nodded slowly. "We'll help, but if this goes south, I'm calling in reinforcements. I'm not risking lives unnecessarily." "Fair enough," Maris said, extending a hand. "Thank you, truly." The drive to the rendezvous point was tense, the atmosphere in the car heavy with anticipation. Rusty sat quietly on Lila's lap, his small frame trembling slightly, as if sensing the gravity of the situation. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, his mind racing with a mix of fear and determination. When they arrived, they were greeted by a small team of individuals, men and women dressed in plain clothes but clearly experienced. Maris introduced them quickly, explaining their roles in the operation. Each carried a quiet confidence that reassured Ethan, though the stakes remained high. As they waited for the transport to arrive, Ethan crouched down beside Rusty, scratching behind the puppy's ears. "You've been through a lot, haven't you, buddy?" he murmured. "Let's hope this is the last time." Rusty wagged his tail faintly, his eyes bright with a mixture of trust and determination. Ethan couldn't help but smile despite the tension in the air. Lila approached, her voice soft but steady. "Whatever happens tonight, we're doing the right thing." Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Let's just hope it's enough." The clearing where the group waited was bathed in shadows as night fell, the dense forest around them muffling the sounds of the outside world. Ethan leaned against his patrol car, watching the team Maris had assembled as they prepared for the interception. They moved with quiet efficiency, checking equipment, sharing brief instructions, and maintaining a tension-filled silence. Despite their calm exteriors, what's happening here? It's not right. And if we don't do something, who will? Maris approached them, her face lined with determination. "It's time. The transport will be here in less than 10 minutes. Are you both ready?" Ethan nodded, adjusting the flashlight on his belt. Lila hesitated before responding, her voice quiet but firm. "We're ready." Maris gave them a reassuring smile, though it did little to ease the tension. "Remember, we're aiming for minimal confrontation. Our goal is to intercept the transport, document everything, and secure the dogs. No heroics, no unnecessary risks." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Understood. Let's get this done." As they moved into position, Ethan couldn't shake the unease settling in his chest. The forest felt alive with unseen eyes, every rustling leaf and snapping twig amplifying his nerves. Rusty, cradled in Lila's arms, seemed unusually alert, his ears perked and his nose twitching. They crouched behind a cluster of bushes near the road, the headlights of the incoming transport casting long, eerie shadows through the trees. Maris signaled for silence, her hand raised as the vehicle approached. The truck was larger than Ethan had expected, its imposing frame rumbling down the dirt road like a beast in the night. As it slowed near the clearing, Maris's team sprang into action. 2 members blocked the road with their vehicles while others emerged from the shadows, flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Stop the truck!" Maris shouted, her voice commanding. The driver hesitated, the vehicle lurching to a halt. Ethan and Lila stayed back, watching as Maris approached the cab with her team. The driver, a burly man with a nervous expression, rolled down the window, his hands visibly shaking. "What's this about?" he demanded, his voice gruff but edged with fear. Maris flashed a badge, one that Ethan hadn't noticed before. "Wildlife Protection Unit. We have reason to believe this transport is carrying illegal cargo. Step out of the vehicle." The driver hesitated, glancing toward the back of the truck. Ethan's instincts kicked in. Something wasn't right. "I'll check the back," Ethan murmured to Lila, who nodded, clutching Rusty tightly. As Ethan moved toward the rear of the truck, he noticed a faint sound, whimpering. His pulse quickened as he unlatched the doors and swung them open, revealing a heartbreaking scene. Dozens of dogs, crammed into cages far too small, stared back at him with wide, frightened eyes. The stench of urine and fear filled the air, and Ethan felt his stomach churn. Some of the dogs were visibly injured, their fur matted with blood and dirt. Lila gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God!" Rusty let out a low whine, squirming in Lila's arms as if he wanted to leap into the truck and comfort the other dogs. Ethan stepped inside, his flashlight sweeping over the cages. "They're dehydrated," he said grimly. "Some of them might not make it if we don't act fast." Maris appeared at his side, her expression a mix of anger and sadness. "We need to get them out of here now," she said, then grabbed Ethan's arm. "What do we do?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "We protect these dogs." And no matter what, the first of the incoming vehicles screeched to a halt near the clearing, its headlights cutting through the chaos. Men in dark clothing emerged, their faces obscured by masks. They moved with purpose, their eyes scanning the scene. "Get back!" Maris shouted, positioning herself between the men in the truck. "This is a protected operation. You have no authority here." One of the men stepped forward, his voice cold and menacing. "You've made a mistake interfering with us. Stand down or you'll regret it." Ethan stepped up beside Maris, his hand resting on the holster of his weapon. "I don't think so." The clearing was alive with tension as the masked men stood opposite Maris's team, their dark silhouettes illuminated by the truck's headlights. Ethan's pulse quickened as he assessed the situation. The odds weren't in their favor. Maris's team was outnumbered, and these men looked like they meant business. Rusty let out a low growl from Lila's arms, his tiny frame trembling but determined. Lila tightened her grip on him, her eyes darting nervously between the two groups. "Let the dogs go," Maris said firmly, her voice steady despite the palpable threat. "You've already lost. We have evidence. There's nowhere for you to run." The man in front, who appeared to be the leader, chuckled darkly. "You think this ends with you? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Ethan stepped forward, his stance resolute. "Maybe not, but I know enough to stop you here and now. Walk away or this gets ugly." The leader's expression hardened. "You don't scare me, officer, and neither does your little rescue mission." The air grew heavier as the men began to spread out, their movements calculated and deliberate. Maris's team tightened their formation, readying themselves for whatever was about to unfold. Ethan's hand hovered over his holster, every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. Just as it seemed like the situation would erupt into violence, a loud bark shattered the silence. All eyes turned to Rusty, who had wriggled free from Lila's arms and darted toward the truck. He stopped in front of one of the cages, barking insistently and pawing at the door. "What is he doing?" Lila whispered, her voice tinged with worry. Ethan followed Rusty's gaze and froze. Inside the cage, a larger dog, a German shepherd with striking amber eyes, was staring back at them. But it wasn't just the dog's appearance that caught Ethan's attention. It was the collar around its neck. Unlike the others, this one had a small blinking device attached to it. "Maris!" Ethan called out, his voice urgent. "You need to see this." Maris hurried over, her eyes widening as she took in the sight of the shepherd and its peculiar collar. "What is that?" she asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and dread. Ethan crouched down, examining the device more closely. "It looks like the leader let out a low laugh, his amusement chilling. "You won't get far. Even if you leave here tonight, you'll never escape what's coming." Ethan ignored him, focusing instead on unlocking the cage. The two dogs exchanged a brief glance, as if silently communicating, before the shepherd positioned itself protectively in front of the smaller puppy. The standoff continued, neither side willing to back down. Ethan's grip on his holster tightened as the masked men began to edge closer. Maris's team stood their ground, but the tension was razor sharp. Suddenly, the sound of sirens pierced the air, their wailing cry growing louder with each passing second. The masked men froze, their leader cursing under his breath. Maris glanced at Ethan, her expression a mix of relief and apprehension. "Did you call for backup?" Ethan shook his head. "Number this wasn't me." The sirens grew deafening as two police vehicles screeched to a halt at the edge of the clearing. Officers poured out, their weapons drawn, and the masked men quickly realized they were outmatched. "Drop your weapons and get on the ground," one of the officers barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. The leader of the masked men hesitated for a moment, his gaze flicking between the officers and his team. Finally, he raised his hands in surrender, signaling for his men to do the same. One by one, they dropped to their knees, their weapons clattering to the ground. Ethan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, relief washing over him. He turned to Maris, who was already instructing her team to secure the dogs and prepare them for transport. As the officers began cuffing the men, one of them approached Ethan. "We got an anonymous tip about suspicious activity in the area," the officer explained. "Looks like we showed up just in time." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Anonymous tip? Did they say anything else?" The officer shook his head, just gave us the location and told us to hurry. Maris looked thoughtful, her gaze drifting to the German shepherd, standing protectively by Rusty's side. "It's almost like someone wanted us to succeed," she murmured. Ethan glanced at the shepherd, his mind racing with possibilities. Who had tipped off the police, and what was the true significance of the collar the dog wore? As the masked men were led away, and the dogs were loaded into transport vans, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface of a much larger mystery. The German shepherd's amber eyes met his, and for a brief moment, Ethan felt as though the dog was trying to tell him something important. As the dust settled and the last of the masked men were driven away in police cars, the clearing returned to an uneasy quiet. The dogs, now loaded into transport vans, whimpered softly, their fear evident but slowly fading in the presence of calm voices and gentle touches from Maris's team. Rusty and the German shepherd stood side by side near Ethan and Lila, the larger dog still wearing the mysterious collar that had set off alarm bells in everyone's mind. Ethan crouched down, his hand hovering near the shepherd's head. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, his voice steady but cautious. "Let's see what you're hiding." The shepherd tensed but didn't growl or move away, its intelligent amber eyes locked on Ethan. Slowly, Ethan reached for the collar, his fingers brushing against the cold metal. He found a clasp and carefully removed it, holding it up to examine it more closely. The device was small, almost unremarkable, except for the blinking light at its center. Maris stepped closer, her expression serious. "That's not just a tracker," she said, her voice low. "It looks like a data storage device too. Someone wanted to monitor this dog, and maybe more." Ethan turned the collar over in his hands, noticing a faint engraving on the side. It was a string of numbers, almost like a serial code. "Does this mean the shepherd was part of something bigger?" he asked, glancing at Maris. She nodded. "It's possible. If this dog was being tracked, whoever owned this collar might still be watching or searching." Lila, holding Rusty close, frowned. "But why would someone go through all this trouble for a dog? What makes him so special?" The shepherd, as if understanding the conversation, let out a low whine and nudged Ethan's arm with its nose. Ethan smiled faintly. "I don't know," he said, "but I think he's trying to tell us something." Maris's team began packing up their equipment, but she stayed behind with Ethan, Lila, and the dogs. "We need to figure out who this collar belongs to," she said, "and fast. If this is connected to illegal activity, we could be dealing with something much larger than just dog trafficking." Ethan nodded. "I'll take the collar to the station. Maybe our tech team can extract data from it." Maris hesitated, then added, "We also need to find a safe place for these dogs, especially this one." She gestured to the German shepherd. "He's at the center of this, whether we like it or not." The group returned to Maris's facility, where the rescued dogs were given food, water, and medical attention. Ethan and Lila helped with the intake process, each dog's condition carefully documented. The German Shepherd, however, remained by Ethan's side, refusing to leave his newfound protector. Lila watched the shepherd with a mix of curiosity and admiration. "It's like he's chosen you," she said, her voice tinged with wonder. Ethan chuckled, scratching the dog behind the ears. "Yeah, well, I didn't exactly sign up for this, but I guess I don't have much of a choice now." Rusty barked, wagging his tail as if in agreement. The sight made Lila laugh, a rare moment of levity amidst the day's chaos. As night fell, Ethan found himself sitting outside the facility with the German Shepherd at his feet. The collar lay on the table beside him, its blinking light now extinguished. He stared at it, his mind racing with questions. Where had this dog come from? What had he been through? And why had he ended up here at this moment? Maris joined him, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to him and sat down, her gaze thoughtful. "You did good today," she said. "Not everyone would have stepped up the way you did." Ethan shrugged, taking a sip of his coffee. "I just did what felt right. Those dogs didn't deserve what was happening to them." Maris nodded, her expression softening. "No, they didn't. And thanks to you, they have a chance now." The shepherd curled up in a warm bed, his small body finally at peace. But her mind lingered on the German Shepherd and the collar. There was more to this story. She was sure of it. As she turned off the lights and headed for the door, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. The morning sun broke through the large windows of the facility, casting a golden glow over the dogs. Ethan found himself awake earlier than usual, sitting by the German Shepherd's side. The collar, now deactivated, rested on the desk before him. He stared at it intently, as if willing it to reveal its secrets. Maris walked into the room, a tablet in her hand. "Good morning," she greeted softly. "I've got some updates." Ethan sat up straighter, nodding. "What did you find?" Maris pulled up a series of emails and reports on her tablet. "Our tech team managed to extract data from the collar. It's not just a tracker, it's also a recording device. There's audio and even some video footage. And it gets stranger. The location data indicates that this dog was moved through several countries over the last year. Whoever owned this dog was covering a lot of ground." Ethan leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What's on the recordings?" Maris hesitated. "It's disturbing. Conversations in multiple languages, some discussing illegal wildlife trade, and others hinting at experiments on animals. This wasn't just trafficking, Ethan. It was something much darker." The weight of her words hung in the air. Ethan glanced at the shepherd, who seemed to sense the shift in energy. The dog stood, pressing its nose against Ethan's hand, as if offering silent reassurance. Maris continued, "There's more. One of the voices in the recordings mentions a specific location, a facility in a remote part of the country. It sounds like it could be where the shepherd escaped from." Ethan's jaw tightened. If that's true, there could be more animals trapped there. "We need to act," Maris nodded. "Agreed. I've already contacted some people who can help us, but this is dangerous territory, Ethan. Whoever is behind this won't give up easily." As Maris left to make further preparations, Lila entered the room, Rusty trotting at her heels. "What's going on?" she asked, noting the tension on Ethan's face. Ethan filled her in on the latest developments, and Lila's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "You're going to that facility, aren't you?" "I don't see any other choice," Ethan replied. "If there are more animals in danger, we have to do something." Lila bit her lip, glancing at Rusty. "Then I'm coming with you." Ethan shook his head. "It's too risky. I can't put you in harm's way." Lila crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. "You're not doing this alone. Besides, you'll need someone who can handle the dogs if things go south." The German shepherded him to act. "Where's the control room?" Ethan asked the technician, his voice firm. The man hesitated, then pointed to a door on the far side of the room. "Through there, but it's heavily secured." Ethan didn't waste a second. He motioned for the technician to move, keeping his weapon trained on him. "You're coming with me. Open the door." The three of them, Ethan, the technician, and the German Shepherd made their way to the control room. The door was reinforced with a keypad and fingerprint scanner. The technician fumbled nervously, his hands shaking as he entered the code and pressed his thumb to the scanner. The door clicked open, revealing a room filled with more monitors and a massive console. Ethan pushed the technician inside and began scanning the screens for any signs of his team. On one monitor, he saw Maris and Lila barricading the door to the hidden room, their faces tense but determined. On another, his team worked to keep the freed animals calm despite the growing chaos. Ethan turned to the technician. "Shut down the lockdown, now!" "I can't," the man said, his voice trembling. "Only he can." "Then override it," Ethan snapped. "There has to be a way." The technician hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "There's a manual override, but it's risky." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Do it." As the technician worked, the German Shepherd stood at Ethan's side, its gaze fixed on the door. Ethan couldn't help but marvel at the dog's unwavering loyalty and courage. "We'll get through this," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. The sound of footsteps in the hallway outside the control room snapped Ethan back to attention. He raised his weapon, his body tense. The German Shepherd growled low in its throat, ready to defend its new friend. The door burst open and Ethan found himself face to face with a shadowy figure. The moment of truth had arrived. Ethan held his weapon steady, his breath measured as the shadowy figure stepped into the control room. The fluorescent lights flickered ominously, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. The German Shepherd barked sharply, its stance protective as it positioned itself between Ethan and the intruder. The man who entered was tall, his features partially obscured by a hooded jacket. His presence exuded a cold, calculating authority, and his eyes scanned the room with an unnerving calmness. "Officer Ethan," he said smoothly, his voice the same one that had spoken over the intercom. "I didn't think you'd get this far." Ethan tightened his grip on the firearm. "Who are you, and what is this place?" The man smirked, taking a step closer. "You're in the remnants of something far larger than you can imagine. A network built on innovation, experimentation, and yes, profit. But you wouldn't understand, would you? People like you cling to laws and ethics, blind to the possibilities that lie beyond." Ethan took a step forward, his gaze unwavering. "I understand enough to know that what you're doing here is wrong. You're exploiting these animals, treating them like commodities instead of living beings." The man laughed, a hollow sound that echoed through the room. "Exploitation. Is that what you think? These animals are part of something revolutionary. The collars, the experiments, it's all for the greater good. But of course, you'd rather play hero than see the bigger picture." "Save the speeches," Ethan shot back. "I'm shutting this down, whether you like it or not." The man's smirk faded, replaced by a cold, menacing glare. "You're welcome to try, but I should warn you, this facility doesn't leave loose ends." At that moment, the monitors flickered back to life, displaying scenes from throughout the facility. Maris and Lila were still barricaded in the hidden room, their faces tense as they worked to secure the documents they'd uncovered. Ethan's team was shown herding the freed animals toward an emergency exit, their movements hurried and precise. The shadowy man gestured toward the screens. "You see?" he said. "You're not just risking your life, officer. You're endangering all of them. Do you really think you can save everyone?" Ethan's jaw tightened, his resolve hardening. "I don't think I know." The shadowy man moved toward the control panel, his hand reaching for a hidden switch. The German Shepherd growled, baring its teeth, and Ethan raised his weapon. "Don't even think about it," he warned. The man froze, then slowly raised his hands. "Fine," he said, a note of mock surrender in his voice. "But tell me, officer, how far are you willing to go? Are you prepared to make sacrifices?" Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he gestured toward the technician. "Override the lockdown, now." The technician hesitated, glancing nervously between Ethan and the shadowy man. I can't. He won't do anything," Ethan interrupted, his tone firm. "You have my word. Just do it." The technician nodded reluctantly and began typing commands into the console. The room was silent except for the soft clicking of the keyboard and the hum of the machinery. The German Shepherd remained alert, its eyes never leaving the shadowy man. After what felt like an eternity, the technician spoke. "The lockdown is lifting. The exits will be operational in 30 seconds. Ethan felt a surge in the arrest of key figures behind the operation. The German Shepherd became a symbol of hope, its story inspiring countless others to take action against animal cruelty. Ethan's life changed in ways he hadn't expected. The dog he named Blaze became his loyal partner, accompanying him not only at work, but in every aspect of his life. Together, they became advocates for animal welfare, using their story to raise awareness and fight for change. One evening, as Ethan and Blaze sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the horizon, he reflected on how far they had come. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure: they would face it together. Blaze rested its head on Ethan's lap, a contented sigh escaping its lips. Ethan smiled, his hand resting on the dog's sleek fur. "We've got a lot of work to do, buddy," he said, "but I think we're ready for it." As the first stars appeared in the night sky, Ethan felt a deep sense of gratitude for the challenges he had faced, the lives he had saved, and the loyal companion by his side. As I picture Ethan sitting with Blaze under that sunset glow, I keep wondering, what if little Rusty hadn't rushed crying to him that morning? Their story hit me hard, not just because of Ethan's courage or Blaze's loyalty, but because of how they found each other in the darkest chaos and turned it into something hopeful. I used to think I knew what friendship meant, but watching Blaze stand by Ethan, guarding him the way Ethan fought for him, I realized there's so much more to it. This isn't just a rescue tale, it's a reminder that sometimes the smallest creatures can change your life forever. If it stirred something in you too, if you want to join me in uncovering more amazing bonds between humans and animals, please subscribe to our YouTube channel today. Turn on notifications so we can walk through these emotional journeys together, where every story teaches us about kindness and strength. Thanks for being here, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.